All right, hello, my wonderful students. So, we all have different interests that affect what we choose to read. Our reading lives are made up of different kinds of texts, different purposes for reading, and different moments when we carve out reading time, just like we talked about, our reading stamina last week. So, one of the things we're going to pay attention to this year is variety in our reading options. So, we all made like our want to read list in your notebook, and they're probably chapter books and maybe some graphic novels right now. But today we're going to read a reference nonfiction book called Extreme Animals, the Toughest Creatures on Earth. And we're going to kind of be like taking notes, doing an example, and then you're going to use all of the skills we talk about today for your lesson at the end of the week. But before we start, let's go over our notes and get our notebooks set up. So to get to your reader's notebook, just come under the classwork tab in Google Classroom, and then under reader's notebook section, click the green icon, and yours is right here on the left. Once you have your notebook open, go down to slide number 14. So we're going to talk about nonfiction text features on this slide. So let's go ahead and type the date here. So whatever date you're doing it on, it is Sunday the 13th. So I'm going to put the 13th. Y'all probably be putting like the 14th or 15th. And we're also going to do that for slide 15 when we talk about the central idea. And then make sure to remember we want to add both of these titles, so central idea for page 3 and nonfiction text features for page 2. We want to add that to our table of contents. So double click to open up the text box. And page 2 should be nonfiction text features. And then page 3 is central idea. And then remember to link these texts to their slides, highlight it, click this insert link button, and we are adding the slide in the presentation. So slide 14 is for the nonfiction, and then central idea is slide 15. I'm going to change this to green. Okay. So the first thing I want us to talk about is the text features. So we know that we don't always read a nonfiction book from cover to cover. We usually read the parts that interest us, and we use the text features like the table of contents, the index, to choose what parts we want to read. And then in the back, there's usually a glossary so you can look up words that you don't know. So for example, in our Extreme Animals book, and there's an index that goes through a bunch of different types of animals. So, we have click beetles, polar bears, and then one of the terms in the glossary is dormancy. So you could reference this to find topics or to look up words. So the main thing we're going to be talking about today is the central idea. So if you've ever been talking to someone and you were just kind of like, oh my gosh, can you please just get to the point? You pretty much wanted them to tell you the central idea of their story. So a central idea is a main point that the author is making, or in other words, it's what the article or text is about. And this central idea can always be supported with details from the article. So there are specific things that you find in whatever you're reading that show what the central idea is. And we use those text features we just talked about, so the table of contents and the index, as well as headings and subheadings to help find the central idea. So we're going to be coming back to this slide to fill out this table. So make sure you keep your notebook tab open. The first section we're going to read is under the subheading World's Coziest Coat on page 12. Polar bear fur could be the warmest on Earth, but there are other contenders for the title of World's Coziest Coat. Arctic musk oxen have the warmest woolly coats. Their wool grows right down to their ankles and is 8 times warmer than sheep's wool. It even has a special name pronounced Kiviet. So that's what this Q word right here, Kiviet. Sea otters have the densest fur on Earth, with almost 1 million hairs per square inch. They spend all their lives in extremely cold water, and their fine fur keeps a layer of warm air trapped next to their skin all the time. Bowhead whales live in the Arctic Ocean, where the water is almost freezing all year round. Of course, they don't have any fur at all, but they do have a layer of fat under the skin almost 2 feet thick. You could say that it's the thickest underwear in the world. So far this section is indeed about how different animals stay warm. So the author tells us about the Arctic musk oxen, sea otters, and bowhead whales. We can see in this little illustration over here, they have coziest coat contest, spelled with K's instead of C's. And so we have our Arctic musk oxen sporting a coat of pure Kiviet, our sea otter, which lives in extremely cold water, and our bowhead whale wearing our 2-foot thick layer of fat underwear. But the title for world's coziest coat probably would have to go to the emperor penguin's coat of feathers. Emperor penguins live at the other end of the planet, the Antarctic, home of the South Pole. The Antarctic is the coldest place on Earth, where winter temperatures are between -4 and -125 degrees Fahrenheit. That is really cold. And winter is when emperor penguins choose to breed. There's nowhere to nest and nothing to make a nest with, so a male emperor penguin takes the one egg that his mate has laid and balances it on his feet. Then he stands around in the snow in 100-mile-an-hour freezing winds for 65 days until the egg hatches. This sounds impossible, not to mention miserable and boring, but emperor dads manage it because of their amazing coat of feathers. It's more than an inch thick, with stiff feathers to keep the wind out and fluffy feathers to keep the warmth in. The coat is so good at keeping heat in and cold out that there can be a temperature difference of 140 degrees between the inside and outside of the feathers. A feathery fold of skin keeps the egg cozy, but daddy penguin's feet have no heat-saving cover. So, to keep their body heat from leaking out that way, they use a counter-current mechanism. This is a fancy way of saying that warm blood headed to the feet instead passes most of its heat to the cold blood going back into the body from the feet. So the feet are kept just barely warmer than freezing, but very little precious body heat ends up escaping through the tootsies. So this whole last section, so we have 4 paragraphs in this subheading section, all about emperor penguins. And I also noticed that there's this cool diagram over here of the emperor penguin with how they're warm, or how they keep their body temperature warm enough with that whole circulation. And then they have a little diagram of their long, stiff feathers that are more than an inch thick. So since this section is so long, we can see right here, it says, but the title for the world's coziest coat probably would have to go to the emperor penguin's coat of feathers. So we can kind of see they have won the coziest coat contest. Poor ox, otter, and whale. They didn't make it. Penguin won, first place. So this whole section is so long because it's describing the central idea. So I'm going to put all these ideas together, and we're going to come back over to our notebook. And down here under central idea in our little table, so we were in the subheading world's coziest coat. So double click, and then we're going to write the central idea of this section is how different animals stay warm, and how the emperor penguin stays the warmest. Warmest. Oh my gosh. Warmest. And if you've ever seen Happy Feet, I'm pretty sure, what's the little penguin's name? Bumble? I think it's Mumble. Something like that. I think those are emperor penguins as well. Okay, so next section we're going to read under the subheading is Sponge Smoothie and the History of Life. That is on page 49. So, Sponge Smoothie and the History of Life. Whales and click beetles suffer huge squashing forces and still stay in one piece. They are really just squash resistors. To be a truly tough animal, you have to be a squash survivor and stay alive even if your body is in bits. Quite a lot of invertebrates, and that's animals without bones like insects, worms, crabs, and snails, are good at this because their bodies are simple and easier to make than big, complicated animals like us. Worms can be chopped in two and grow a new other half. Starfish can be cut to bits, and each bit will become a new starfish, which is something that divers in Australia found out rather too late when they tried to get rid of a plague of crown of thorns starfish on the Great Barrier Reef by chopping them up. So I'm already thinking about the central idea of this section. So the paragraph is about how some invertebrate are these squash survivors and that they can grow back again, like the starfish and the worm. Sponges are the toughest of all. They live in the sea and come in all shapes and sizes, from tiny flat ones to huge chimney-shaped ones. You might even have used the dead rubbery insides of one to wash yourself in the bath. To be honest, even live sponges don't do much. They just sort of sit there and grow. But put one in a blender and you'll see that they do something no other animal can. Pour your sponge smoothie back into its seawater home and it will put itself back together. All the tiny little bits of sponge will find each other and slowly rebuild the whole animal. The reason that sponges can do this is an important part of the history of life on Earth. All right, so let's see. I'm going to show you guys a picture of sea sponges because in our little illustration over here, because now it kind of makes sense. Like, okay, a sponge smoothie, like if you take a sea sponge, blend it up, it looks like a smoothie, but then it rebuilds itself once it gets back into the ocean. Then we also have our poor little, well, I guess not poor little starfish because one starfish is about to become 6 starfish. I don't think Patrick from SpongeBob would agree with this statement, though. But let me show you a picture of what sea sponges look like. All right, so these are sea sponges. So when it was talking about how you might have used one, like in the shower or in the bath, this is what they would look like. But then underwater, they kind of look like coral, which I think some of this might actually be coral. Let's see. We can get some better pictures. So they're really colorful. Like it said, they kind of just sit there and grow, so they don't necessarily have a purpose. But yeah, you might be using a dead sea sponge in your shower. Who knows? Like these guys. All right, back over to our story. So we need to think about the central idea of this section. So we talked about the title, the different types of animals that it discussed. So I think that the central idea of this section is how animals can rebuild themselves even if they have been harmed or destroyed. So let's add that to our notebook. Double click here. The central idea of this section is how animals can rebuild themselves even if they have been harmed or destroyed. So now we need to step back and see how these sections connect to the central idea of the whole book. So we already know that the title is Extreme Animals. So remember on our cover, the book is called Extreme Animals, the Toughest Creatures on Earth. So this gives us a hint already. And we read about how animals with the warmest coats are tough. And obviously, if you can blend yourself and put yourself back together, that's pretty extreme. So we can say the central idea of the book is extreme animals and how they are tough. So we just want like a basic statement. And remember, when you're reading nonfiction, especially, to stop and think about the central idea of each section and how those can build on your understanding of the entire text. So that is it for this lesson. Make sure you go back over to Google Classroom and click Mark as done for that assignment. And remember to fill out your reading log. So your reading response, the first one is due this Friday, so make sure you're filling out your first reading log and response sheet. And email me or comment on the assignment if you have any questions.